справа и слева на выходе.
Забуксовала, темпы сбавили все ведущие государства, хотя темпы в Азии по-прежнему остаются самыми высокими, и коммунистический Китай вытягивает.
Government needs to play a bigger role, social policies need to be smarter. Regulation in various areas, including the finance market, needs to improve. Bankers object to that naturally. Obama is trying to deal with them, but he can't.
The Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, the name of the health care reform we passed 2 years ago. In doing so, they've reaffirmed a fundamental
illness or accident should lead to any family's financial ruin. I know there will be a lot of discussion how these things tend to be viewed here in Washington.
But that discussion completely misses the point. Whatever the politics, today's decision was a victory for people all over this country whose lives will be more secure.
As well. I think if you're a lawyer appearing before the Supreme Court and you're not very nervous, you don't really understand what's going on. I was very nervous when I did my last oral argument as well. I think if you're a lawyer appearing before the Supreme Court and you're not very nervous, you don't really understand what's going on.
It's a madhouse! A madhouse! It's a madhouse! A madhouse!
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yes.
Уважаемые друзья, мы находимся в штаб-квартире «Единой России», но я хочу сейчас и отсюда обратиться ко всем гражданам страны и прежде всего к тем, которые проголосовали за партию, поддержали ее. Я хочу сказать, что несмотря на все, кто способствовал этому результату, вам тоже большое спасибо.
Thank you, everybody. All those who said yes to a great Russia. I asked you once, will we win? We will win, and we have won. We have won in an open and fair struggle. Thank you. Thank you. We have won in an open and fair struggle. But this was more than just a presidential election. This was a very important test for us all, for all of our people. This was a test whether we are politically mature and independent enough. And we have demonstrated that nobody can impose anything on us. Nobody can impose anything.
Проявляется в так называемых гуманитарных операциях, экспорте ракетно-бомбовой демократии и вмешательство во внутренние конфликты. Мы видим, насколько противоречиво и разбалансированно идет процесс реформ в Северной Африке и на Ближнем Востоке. А трагические ливийские события, безусловно, у многих стоят перед глазами. И безусловно, также нельзя повторить подобные сценарии в других странах, например, в Сирии. Убежден, нужно сделать все сделать максимально для того, чтобы принудить конфликтующие стороны к выработке мирного политического решения всех спорных вопросов. Нужно стремиться и содействовать такому диалогу.
Well, from what I hear from the left and right in the American media, it must be stolen elections, and Vladimir Putin has just installed a horrible totalitarian dictatorship, and people are crying in the streets, and so on and so forth. Is that inaccurate, do you think?
Well, what do you think then? We just heard the reaction from Ghana about the way the U.S. media have handled this one.
Well, I'm exaggerating, of course. It hasn't been that bad. But it is interesting that you have the left and right in the American media who like to argue about a lot of different things over the course of the year. They are in agreement that Putin is bad. They want to find anything they could find about the election that might suggest fraud. They will trump up. They'll have whole reports on some punk rock girls band named Pussy Riot, and they'll put that in the front page of all the websites, so on and so forth. So the American media is really in unison about the America treats Vladimir Putin as a threat, that he's a bad guy, and so on and so forth. And I think in some ways we have to look at the bigger picture of what all this means, of whether they're really concerned about democracy or if it's something else. And, from my view, a lot of times American foreign policy seems irrational or crazy or based on wishful thinking. But I think it, in many ways, is rational, and that is the U.S. establishment wants other countries to either be Canada or, say, post-invasion Libya. And with no disrespect to Canada, they want countries to essentially be second-rate powers. They want them to be subservient. They don't want to question some real big things about our current world order. And that is the dollar as international reserve currency, the fact that international transactions are going to be priced in dollars, oil's priced in dollars. They don't want to question the large American footprint around the globe. And in other ways, they don't want to question Israel's sovereignty as a power in the Middle East. And they will put up with something like chaos. They will put up with something like a second-rate power if they can get those countries to agree on those big things.
But Richard,
Vladimir Putin questions those big things, and that's why he is treated as a pariah by the media.
all right, but what about the healthy opposition we've seen here, which has been allowed the same way that we see opposition in the States and in other European countries? Does not the States think that Putin will react to this opposition and reform and modernize Russia as a result of that?
Well, I think there's a lot more healthy opposition in Russia than there is in the United States, at least from what I can see. In the United States, again, you'll have a lot of arguments on left and right about some hot-button issues and things like that. But I don't think there's really the diversity, to use a word that so popular in America, that you find in Russia. In Russia, you have all sorts of parties. You have a communist party. You have a kind of pro-capitalist liberal party. You have nationalist parties. You don't get really anything like that in the United States. We have, in many ways, maybe you could say a myopic or a provincial, a really narrow spectrum of opinion in the United States. One reason why I've established my website and some other media ventures is just so we can have another view, that there is another perspective. There actually seems to be other perspectives in the Russian national political debate that are simply absent in the United States.
Richard, very briefly though, the future relationship between the States and Russia, how do you see that progressing in light of the so-called resetting relations? Will that continue now with Putin now as president? Just very briefly.
No, I think the relation will likely get worse. Because, again, Putin is not someone, particularly now that he's in power, it's not someone who's going to give in to those big demands that I talked about at the beginning of this conversation. He is going to question the world order that Washington wants. And because of that, he is always going to be treated as a bit of a pariah.
Okay, Richard, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for your time joining us there live in the States. Richard.
But the media coverage was mostly focused on discontent among many Russians, and some outlets went as far as claiming rampant fraud, stolen election, statements that would insult the majority of Russians who voted for Putin. It was a landslide victory, not just the vote, but all opinion polls confirm it. What's also interesting about the media coverage here, everybody knows that Putin is the most popular politician in Russia. So there is the acknowledgement of that, but at the same time, there seems to be some kind of, lack of respect for the choice that Russians have made. There's more inconsistency about, most experts agree the last candidate who would want vote rigging would be probably Prime Minister Putin, who was far ahead of his rivals in all opinion polls already before the elections. But nonetheless, some of our colleagues go with headlines like, for example, our colleague at Washington Post goes with a headline, Russians stolen election confirms reset failure.
Papers. This is the Independent. Critics cry fraud. A picture there on the front page. They've got that ubiquitous now picture of Putin wiping a tear away from his eye last night as he celebrated the victory. There's a picture from a rural polling station there just to show you what voting can be like in Russia. We've also got the Times here, which is less critical than many of the other papers actually. Putin dismisses fraud claims and accuses opponents of trying to break up Russia. They're also carrying that picture of Putin wiping away a tear. And I've also got the Sun here, which carries quite nice little caption, Vlad to be back, as he also brushes away a tear. Putin poll fault, though, it says. So really overwhelmingly negative press coverage, and you really have to read the fine print in Britain's newspapers today to discover that this was a decisive election victory at well above 50%, even taking into account those allegations of voting fraud.
The Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, the name of the health care reform we passed 2 years ago.
Every nation represented here directly and urgently makes it clear that Russia and China will pay a price because they are holding up progress, blockading it, that is no longer tolerable.
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is.
Yes.
If it's between Obama and Romney, there isn't all that much difference.